Chapter 16. Versailles. It is wonderfully beautiful. You gaze and stare and try to understand that it is real, that it is on the earth, that it is not the Garden of Eden, but your brain grows giddy, stupefied by the world of beauty around you, and you half believe you are the dupe of an exquisite dream. The scene thrills one like military music. A noble palace, stretching its ornamented front, block upon block away, till it seemed that it would never end. A grand promenade before it, whereon the armies of an empire might parade. All about it rainbows of flowers and colossal statues that were almost numberless, and yet seemed only scattered over the ample space. Broad flights of stone steps leading down from the promenade to lower grounds of the park stairways that whole regiments might stand to arms upon and have room to spare. Vast fountains whose great bronze effigies discharged rivers of sparkling water into the air, and mingled 100 curving jets together in forms of matchless beauty. Wide grass-carpeted avenues that branched hither and thither in every direction, and wandered to seemingly interminable distances. Walled all the way on either side with compact ranks of leafy trees, whose branches met above, and formed arches as faultless and as symmetrical as ever were carved in stone. And here and there were glimpses of sylvan lakes, with miniature ships glassed in their surfaces. And everywhere on the palace steps, and the great promenade, around the fountains, among the trees, and far under the arches of the endless avenues, hundreds and hundreds of people in gay costumes walked or ran or danced, and gave to the fairy picture the life and animation which was all of perfection it could have lacked. It was worth a pilgrimage to see. Everything is on so gigantic a scale. Nothing is small, nothing is cheap. The statues are all large, the palace is grand, the park covers a fair-sized county, the avenues are interminable. All the distances and all the dimensions about Versailles are vast. I used to think the pictures exaggerated these distances and these dimensions beyond all reason, and that they made Versailles more beautiful than it was possible for any place in the world to be. I know now that the pictures never came up to the subject in any respect, and that no painter could represent Versailles on canvas as beautiful as it is in reality. I used to abuse Louis XIV for spending $200 million in creating this marvelous park, when bread was so scarce with some of his subjects, but I have forgiven him now. He took a tract of land, 60 miles in circumference, and set to work to make this park and build this palace and a road to it from Paris. He kept 36,000 men employed daily on it, and the labor was so unhealthy that they used to die and be hauled off by cartloads every night. The wife of a nobleman of the time speaks of this as an inconvenience, but naively remarks that it does not seem worthy of attention in the happy state of tranquility we now enjoy. I always thought ill of people at home who trimmed their shrubbery into pyramids and squares and spires and all manner of unnatural shapes. And when I saw the same thing being practiced in this great park, I began to feel dissatisfied. But I soon saw the idea of the thing and the wisdom of it. They seek the general effect. We distort a dozen sickly trees into unaccustomed shapes in a little yard no bigger than a dining room, and then surely they look absurd enough. But here they take 200,000 tall forest trees and set them in a double row. Allow no sign of leaf or branch to grow on the trunk lower down than 6 feet above the ground. From that point, the boughs begin to project, and very gradually they extend outward further and further till they meet overhead, and a faultless tunnel of foliage is formed. The arch is mathematically precise. The effect is then very fine. They make trees take 50 different shapes, and so these quaint effects are infinitely varied and picturesque. The trees in no two avenues are shaped alike, and consequently the eye is not fatigued with anything in the nature of monotonous uniformity. I will drop this subject now, leaving it to others to determine how these people manage to make endless ranks of lofty forest trees grow to just a certain thickness of trunk, say 1 2/3 feet. How they make them spring to precisely the same height for miles. How they make them grow so close together. How they compel one huge limb to spring from the same identical spot on each tree and form the main sweep of the arch. And how all these things are kept exactly in the same condition, and in the same exquisite shapeliness and symmetry month after month and year after year for, I have tried to reason out the problem and have failed. We walked through the great hall of sculpture and the 150 galleries of paintings in the Palace of Versailles, and felt that to be in such a place was useless unless one had a whole year at his disposal. These pictures are all battle scenes, and only one solitary little canvas among them all treats of anything but great French victories. We wandered, also, through the Grand Trianon and the Petit Trianon, those monuments of royal prodigality, and with histories so mournful filled as it is, with souvenirs of Napoleon I and 3 dead kings and as many queens. In one sumptuous bed they had all slept in succession, but no one occupies it now. In a large dining room stood the table at which Louis XIV and his mistress Madame Maintenon, and after them Louis XV and Pompadour, had sat at their meals naked and unattended for. The table stood upon a trapdoor, which descended with it to regions below when it was necessary to replenish its dishes. In a room of the Petit Trianon stood the furniture, just as poor Marie Antoinette left it when the mob came and dragged her and the king to Paris, never to return. Near at hand, in the stables, were prodigious carriages that showed no color, but gold carriages used by former kings of France on state occasions, and never used now save when a kingly head is to be crowned or an imperial infant christened. And with them were some curious sleighs, whose bodies were shaped like lions, swans, tigers, etc. vehicles that had once been handsome with pictured designs and fine workmanship, but were dusty and decaying now. They had their history. When Louis XIV had finished the Grand Trianon, he told Maintenon he had created a paradise for her, and asked if she could think of anything now to wish for. He said he wished the Trianon to be perfection, nothing less. She said she could think of but one thing: it was summer, and it was balmy France, yet she would like well to sleigh ride in the leafy avenues of Versailles. The next morning found miles and miles of grassy avenues spread thick with snowy salt and sugar, and a procession of those quaint sleighs waiting to receive the chief concubine of the gayest and most unprincipled court that France has ever seen. From sumptuous Versailles, with its palaces, its statues, its gardens, and its fountains, we journeyed back to Paris and sought its antipodes, the Faubourg Saint-Antoine. Little narrow streets, dirty children blockading them, greasy, slovenly women capturing and spanking them, filthy dens on first floors, with rag stores in them. The heaviest business in the Faubourg is the chiffoniers. Other filthy dens where whole suits of second- and third-hand clothing are sold at prices that would ruin any proprietor who did not steal his stock. Still other filthy dens where they sold groceries sold them by the halfpenny worth $5 would buy the man out, goodwill and all. Up these little crooked streets, they will murder a man for $7 and dump the body in the Seine. And up some other of these streets, most of them, I should say, live lorettes. All through this Faubourg Saint-Antoine, misery, poverty, vice, and crime go hand in hand, and the evidences of it stare one in the face from every side. Here the people live who begin the revolutions. Whenever there is anything of that kind to be done, they are always ready. They take as much genuine pleasure in building a barricade as they do in cutting a throat or shoving a friend into the Seine. It is these savage-looking ruffians who storm the splendid halls of the Tuileries occasionally, and swarm into Versailles when a king is to be called to account. But they will build no more barricades, they will break no more soldiers' heads with paving stones. Louis Napoleon has taken care of all that. He is annihilating the crooked streets and building in their stead noble boulevards as straight as an arrow avenues, which a cannon ball could traverse from end to end, without meeting an obstruction more irresistible than the flesh and bones of men boulevards, whose stately edifices will never afford refuges and plotting places for starving, discontented revolution breeders. 5 of these great thoroughfares radiate from one ample center, which is exceedingly well adapted to the accommodation of heavy artillery. The mobs used to riot there, but they must seek another rallying place in future. And this ingenious Napoleon paves the streets of his great cities with a smooth, compact composition of asphaltum and sand. No more barricades of flagstones, no more assaulting His Majesty's troops with cobbles. I cannot feel friendly toward my quondam fellow American, Napoleon III, especially at this time, when in fancy I see his credulous victim, Maximilian, lying stark and stiff in Mexico, and his maniac widow watching eagerly from her French asylum for the form that will never come. But I do admire his nerve, his calm self-reliance, his shrewd good sense. Chapter 17. We had a pleasant journey of it seaward again. We found that for the 3 past nights, our ship had been in a state of war. The first night, the sailors of a British ship, being happy with grog, came down on the pier and challenged our sailors to a free fight. They accepted with alacrity, repaired to the pier, and gained their share of a drawn battle. Several bruised and bloody members of both parties were carried off by the police and imprisoned until the following morning. The next night, the British boys came again to renew the fight, but our men had had strict orders to remain on board and out of sight. They did so, and the besieging party grew noisy and more abusive as the fact became apparent to them that our men were afraid to come out. They went away finally, with a closing burst of ridicule and offensive epithets. The third night they came again and were more obstreperous than ever. They swaggered up and down the almost deserted pier and hurled curses, obscenity, and stinging sarcasms at our crew. It was more than human nature could bear. The executive officer ordered our men ashore with instructions not to fight. They charged the British and gained a brilliant victory. I probably would not have mentioned this war had it ended differently. But I travel to learn, and I still remember that they picture no French defeats in the battle galleries of Versailles. It was like home to us to step on board the comfortable ship again and smoke and lounge about her breezy decks. And yet it was not altogether like home, either, because so many members of the family were away. We missed some pleasant faces, which we would rather have found at dinner, and at night there were gaps in the euchre parties which could not be satisfactorily filled. Molt was in England, Jack in Switzerland, Charlie in Spain. Blucher was gone, none could tell where. But we were at sea again, and we had the stars and the ocean to look at, and plenty of room to meditate in. In due time, the shores of Italy were sighted, and as we stood gazing from the decks, early in the bright summer morning, the stately city of Genoa rose up out of the sea and flung back the sunlight from her 100 palaces. Here we rest for the present, or rather, here we have been trying to rest for some little time, but we run about too much to accomplish a great deal in that line. I would like to remain here. I had rather not go any further. There may be prettier women in Europe, but I doubt it. The population of Genoa is 120,000. 2/3 of these are women, I think, and at least 2/3 of the women are beautiful. They are as dressy and as tasteful and as graceful as they could possibly be without being angels. However, angels are not very dressy, I believe. At least the angels in pictures are not. They wear nothing but wings. But these Genoese women do look so charming. Most of the young demoiselles are robed in a cloud of white from head to foot, though many trick themselves out more elaborately. 9/10 of them wear nothing on their heads but a filmy sort of veil, which falls down their backs like a white mist. They are very fair, and many of them have blue eyes, but black and dreamy dark brown ones are met with oftenest. The ladies and gentlemen of Genoa have a pleasant fashion of promenading in a large park on the top of a hill in the center of the city, from 6 till 9 in the evening, and then eating ices in a neighboring garden an hour or 2 longer. We went to the park on Sunday evening. 2,000 persons were present, chiefly young ladies and gentlemen. The gentlemen were dressed in the very latest Paris fashions, and the robes of the ladies glinted among the trees like so many snowflakes. The multitude moved round and round the park in a great procession. The bands played, and so did the fountains. The moon and the gas lamps lit up the scene, and altogether it was a brilliant and an animated picture. I scanned every female face that passed, and it seemed to me that all were handsome. I never saw such a freshet of loveliness before. I did not see how a man of only ordinary decision of character could marry here, because before he could get his mind made up, he would fall in love with somebody else. Never smoke any Italian tobacco. Never do it on any account. It makes me shudder to think what it must be made of. You cannot throw an old cigar, stub down anywhere, but some vagabond will pounce upon it on the instant. I like to smoke a good deal, but it wounds my sensibilities to see one of these stub hunters watching me out of the corners of his hungry eyes and calculating how long my cigar will be likely to last. It reminded me too painfully of that San Francisco undertaker who used to go to sickbeds with his watch in his hand and time the corpse. One of these stub hunters followed us all over the park last night, and we never had a smoke that was worth anything. We were always moved to appease him with the stub before the cigar was half gone, because he looked so viciously anxious. He regarded us as his own legitimate prey, by right of discovery, I think, because he drove off several other professionals who wanted to take stock in us. Now they surely must chew up those old stubs and dry and sell them for smoking tobacco. Therefore, give your custom to other than Italian brands of the article. The Superb and the City of Palaces are names which Genoa has held for centuries. She is full of palaces, certainly, and the palaces are sumptuous inside, but they are very rusty without and make no pretensions to architectural magnificence. Genoa the Superb would be a felicitous title if it referred to the women. We have visited several of the palace's immense thick-walled piles, with great stone staircases, tessellated marble pavements on the floors. Sometimes they make a mosaic work of intricate designs, wrought in pebbles or little fragments of marble laid in cement, and grand salons hung with pictures by Rubens, Guido, Titian, Paul Veronese, and so on, and portraits of heads of the family, in plumed helmets and gallant coats of mail, and patrician ladies in stunning costumes of centuries ago. But of course, the folks were all out in the country for the summer, and might not have known enough to ask us to dinner if they had been at home. And so all the grand empty salons, with their resounding pavements, their grim pictures of dead ancestors, and tattered banners with the dust of bygone centuries upon them, seemed to brood solemnly of death and the grave, and our spirits ebbed away, and our cheerfulness passed from us. We never went up to the 11th story. We always began to suspect ghosts. There was always an undertaker-looking servant along, too, who handed us a program, pointed to the picture that began the list of the salon he was in, and then stood stiff and stark and unsmiling in his petrified livery till we were ready to move on to the next chamber, whereupon he marched sadly ahead and took up another malignantly respectful position as before. I wasted so much time praying that the roof would fall in on these dispiriting flunkies that I had but little left to bestow upon palace and pictures. And besides, as in Paris, we had a guide. Perdition catch all the guides. This one said he was the most gifted linguist in Genoa, as far as English was concerned, and that only 2 persons in the city beside himself could talk the language at all. He showed us the birthplace of Christopher Columbus, and after we had reflected in silent awe before it for 15 minutes, he said it was not the birthplace of Columbus, but of Columbus' grandmother. When we demanded an explanation of his conduct, he only shrugged his shoulders and answered in barbarous Italian. I shall speak further of this guide in a future chapter. All the information we got out of him we shall be able to carry along with us, I think. I have not been to church so often in a long time as I have in the last few weeks. The people in these old lands seem to make churches their specialty. Especially does this seem to be the case with the citizens of Genoa. I think there is a church every 300 or 400 yards all over town. The streets are sprinkled from end to end with shovel-hatted, long-robed, well-fed priests, and the church bells by dozens are pealing all the day long, nearly. Every now and then one comes across a friar of orders gray, with shaven head, long, coarse robe, rope girdle, and beads, and with feet cased in sandals or entirely bare. These worthies suffer in the flesh and do penance all their lives, I suppose, but they look like consummate famine breeders. They are all fat and serene. The old cathedral of San Lorenzo is about as notable a building as we have found in Genoa. It is vast and has colonnades of noble pillars, and a great organ, and the customary pomp of gilded moldings, pictures, frescoed ceilings, and so forth. I cannot describe it. Of course it would require a good many pages to do that. But it is a curious place. They said that half of it from the front door halfway down to the altar was a Jewish synagogue before the Savior was born, and that no alteration had been made in it since that time. We doubted the statement, but did it reluctantly. We would much rather have believed it. The place looked in too perfect repair to be so ancient. The main point of interest about the cathedral is the little chapel of St. John the Baptist. They only allow women to enter it on one day in the year, on account of the animosity they still cherish against the sex, because of the murder of the saint to gratify a caprice of Herodias. In this chapel is a marble chest, in which they told us were the ashes of Saint John, and around it was wound a chain, which, they said, had confined him when he was in prison. We did not desire to disbelieve these statements, and yet we could not feel certain that they were correct, partly because we could have broken that chain, and so could Saint John, and partly because we had seen Saint John's ashes before in another church. We could not bring ourselves to think Saint John had two sets of ashes. They also showed us a portrait of the Madonna which was painted by Saint Luke, and it did not look half as old and smoky as some of the pictures by Rubens. We could not help admiring the apostle's modesty in never once mentioning in his writings that he could paint. But isn't this relic matter a little overdone? We find a piece of the true cross in every old church we go into, and some of the nails that held it together. I would not like to be positive, but I think we have seen as much as a keg of these nails. Then there is the crown of thorns. They have part of one in Saint-Chapelle, in Paris, and part of one also in Notre Dame. And as for bones of Saint Denis, I feel certain we have seen enough of them to duplicate him if necessary. I only meant to write about the churches, but I keep wandering from the subject. I could say that the Church of the Annunciation is a wilderness of beautiful columns, of statues, gilded moldings, and pictures almost countless, but that would give no one an entirely perfect idea of the thing, and so where is the use? One family built the whole edifice and have got money left. There is where the mystery lies. We had an idea at first that only a mint could have survived the expense. These people here live in the heaviest, highest, broadest, darkest, solidest houses one can imagine. Each one might laugh a siege to scorn. 100 feet front and 100 high is about the style, and you go up 3 flights of stairs before you begin to come upon signs of occupancy. Everything is stone, and stone of the heaviest floors, stairways, mantels, benches, everything. The walls are 4 to 5 feet thick. The streets generally are 4 or 5 to 8 feet wide and as crooked as a corkscrew. You go along one of these gloomy cracks and look up and behold the sky like a mere ribbon of light far above your head, where the tops of the tall houses on either side of the street bend almost together. You feel as if you were at the bottom of some tremendous abyss, with all the world far above you. You wind in and out and here and there, in the most mysterious way, and have no more idea of the points of the compass than if you were a blind man. You can never persuade yourself that these are actually streets, and the frowning, dingy, monstrous houses dwellings, till you see one of these beautiful, prettily dressed women emerge from them, see her emerge from a dark, dreary-looking den that looks dungeon all over, from the ground away halfway up to heaven. And then you wonder that such a charming moth could come from such a forbidding shell as that. The streets are wisely made narrow, and the houses heavy and thick and stony, in order that the people may be cool in this roasting climate. And they are cool and stay so. And while I think of it, the men wear hats and have very dark complexions, but the women wear no headgear but a flimsy veil like a gossamer's web, and yet are exceedingly fair as a general thing. Singular, isn't it? The huge palaces of Genoa are each supposed to be occupied by one family, but they could accommodate 100, I should think. They are relics of the grandeur of Genoa's palmy days, the days when she was a great commercial and maritime power several centuries ago. These houses, solid marble palaces though they be, are in many cases of a dull pinkish color. Outside, and from pavement to eaves, are pictured with Genoese battle scenes, with monstrous Jupiters and Cupids, and with familiar illustrations from Grecian mythology. Where the paint has yielded to age and exposure and is peeling off in flakes and patches, the effect is not happy. A noseless Cupid, or a Jupiter with an eye out, or a Venus with a fly blister on her breast, are not attractive features in a picture. Some of these painted walls reminded me somewhat of the tall van, plastered with fanciful bills and posters, that follows the bandwagon of a circus about a country village. I have not read or heard that the outsides of the houses of any other European city are frescoed in this way. I cannot conceive of such a thing as Genoa in ruins. Such massive arches, such ponderous substructions as support these towering broad-winged edifices, we have seldom seen before. And surely the great blocks of stone of which these edifices are built can never decay. Walls that are as thick as an ordinary American doorway is high cannot crumble. The republics of Genoa and Pisa were very powerful in the Middle Ages. Their ships filled the Mediterranean, and they carried on an extensive commerce with Constantinople and Syria. Their warehouses were the great distributing depots, from whence the costly merchandise of the East was sent abroad over Europe. They were warlike little nations, and defied, in those days, governments that overshadow them now as mountains overshadow molehills. The Saracens captured and pillaged Genoa 900 years ago, but during the following century, Genoa and Pisa entered into an offensive and defensive alliance, and besieged the Saracen colonies in Sardinia and the Balearic Isles with an obstinacy that maintained its pristine vigor and held to its purpose for 40 long years. They were victorious at last, and divided their conquests equably among their great patrician families. Descendants of some of those proud families still inhabit the palaces of Genoa, and trace in their own features a resemblance to the grim knights whose portraits hang in their stately halls, and to pictured beauties with pouting lips and merry eyes whose originals have been dust and ashes for many a dead and forgotten century. The hotel we live in belonged to one of those great orders of Knights of the Cross in the times of the Crusades, and its mailed sentinels once kept watch and ward in its massive turrets, and woke the echoes of these halls and corridors with their iron heels. But Genoa's greatness has degenerated into an unostentatious commerce in velvets and silver filigree work. They say that each European town has its specialty. These filigree things are Genoa's specialty. Her smiths take silver ingots and work them up into all manner of graceful and beautiful forms. They make bunches of flowers, from flakes and wires of silver, that counterfeit the delicate creations the frost weaves upon a window pane. And we were shown a miniature silver temple whose fluted columns, whose Corinthian capitals and rich entablatures, whose spire, statues, bells, and ornate lavishness of sculpture were wrought in polished silver, and with such matchless art that every detail was a fascinating study and the finished edifice a wonder of beauty. We are ready to move again, though we are not really tired yet of the narrow passages of this old marble cave. Cave is a good word when speaking of Genoa under the stars. When we have been prowling at midnight through the gloomy crevices they call streets, where no footfalls but ours were echoing, where only ourselves were abroad, and lights appeared only at long intervals and at a distance, and mysteriously disappeared again, and the houses at our elbows seemed to stretch upward farther than ever toward the heavens, the memory of a cave I used to know at home was always in my mind, with its lofty passages, its silence and solitude, its shrouding gloom, its sepulchral echoes. Its flitting lights, and more than all, its sudden revelations of branching crevices and corridors where we least expected them. We are not tired of the endless processions of cheerful, chattering gossipers that throng these courts and streets all day long, either, nor of the coarse-robed monks, nor of the Asti wines which that old doctor, whom we call the Oracle, with customary felicity in the matter of getting everything wrong, misterms nasty. But we must go, nevertheless. Our last sight was the cemetery, a burial place intended to accommodate 60,000 bodies, and we shall continue to remember it after we shall have forgotten the palaces. It is a vast marble colonnaded corridor extending around a great unoccupied square of ground. Its broad floor is marble, and on every slab is an inscription for every slab covers a corpse. On either side, as one walks down the middle of the passage, are monuments, tombs, and sculptured figures that are exquisitely wrought and are full of grace and beauty. They are new and snowy. Every outline is perfect, every feature guiltless of mutilation, flaw, or blemish. And therefore, to us these far-reaching ranks of bewitching forms are 100-fold more lovely than the damaged and dingy statuary they have saved from the wreck of ancient art and set up in the galleries of Paris for the worship of the world. Well provided with cigars and other necessaries of life, we are now ready to take the cars for Milan. Chapter 18. All day long, we sped through a mountainous country whose peaks were bright with sunshine, whose hillsides were dotted with pretty villas sitting in the midst of gardens and shrubbery, and whose deep ravines were cool and shady and looked ever so inviting from where we and the birds were winging our flight through the sultry upper air. We had plenty of chilly tunnels, wherein to check our perspiration, though. We timed one of them. We were 20 minutes passing through it, going at the rate of 30 to 35 miles an hour. Beyond Alessandria, we passed the battlefield of Marengo. Toward dusk, we drew near Milan and caught glimpses of the city and the blue mountain peaks beyond. But we were not caring for these things. They did not interest us in the least. We were in a fever of impatience. We were dying to see the renowned cathedral. We watched in this direction and that all around everywhere. We needed no one to point it out. We did not wish anyone to point it out. We would recognize it even in the desert of the Great Sahara. At last, a forest of graceful needles, shimmering in the amber sunlight, rose slowly above the pygmy housetops, as one sometimes sees, in the far horizon, a gilded and pinnacled mass of cloud lift itself above the waste of waves, at sea the cathedral. We knew it in a moment. Half of that night, and all of the next day, this architectural autocrat was our sole object of interest. What a wonder it is! So grand, so solemn, so vast. And yet so delicate, so airy, so graceful. A very world of solid weight, and yet it seems in the soft moonlight only a fairy delusion of frostwork that might vanish with a breath. How sharply its pinnacled angles and its wilderness of spires were cut against the sky, and how richly their shadows fell upon its snowy roof. It was a vision, a miracle, an anthem sung in stone, a poem wrought in marble. Howsoever you look at the great cathedral, it is noble, it is beautiful. Wherever you stand in Milan or within 7 miles of Milan, it is visible, and when it is visible, no other object can chain your whole attention. Leave your eyes unfettered by your will but a single instant, and they will surely turn to seek it. It is the first thing you look for when you rise in the morning, and the last your lingering gaze rests upon at night. Surely it must be the princeliest creation that ever brain of man conceived. At 9 o'clock in the morning, we went and stood before this marble colossus. The central one of its 5 great doors is bordered with a bas-relief of birds and fruits and beasts and insects, which have been so ingeniously carved out of the marble that they seem like living creatures, and the figures are so numerous, and the design so complex that one might study it a week without exhausting its interest. On the great steeple surmounting the myriad of spires inside of the spires over the doors, the windows in nooks and corners every, where that a niche or a perch can be found about the enormous building, from summit to base, there is a marble statue, and every statue is a study in itself. Raphael and Gillo, Canova giants like these gave birth to the designs, and their own pupils carved them. Every face is eloquent with expression, and every attitude is full of grace. Away above, on the lofty roof, rank on rank of carved and fretted spires spring high in the air, and through their rich tracery one sees the sky beyond. In their midst, the central steeple towers proudly up like the mainmast of some great Indiaman among a fleet of coasters. We wished to go aloft. The sacristan showed us a marble stairway. Of course it was marble, and of the purest and whitest there is no other stone, no brick, no wood among its building materials, and told us to go up 182 steps and stop till he came. It was not necessary to say stop, we should have done that anyhow. We were tired by the time we got there. This was the roof. Here, springing from its broad marble flagstones, were the long files of spires, looking very tall close at hand, but diminishing in the distance like the pipes of an organ. We could see now that the statue on the top of each was the size of a large man, though they all looked like dolls from the street. We could see, also, that from the inside of each and every one of these hollow spires, from 16 to 31 beautiful marble statues looked out upon the world below. From the eaves to the comb of the roof stretched in endless succession great curved marble beams, like the fore and aft braces of a steamboat, and along each beam from end to end stood up a row of richly carved flowers and fruits, each separate and distinct in kind, and over 15,000 species represented. At a little distance, these rows seem to close together like the ties of a railroad track, and then the mingling together of the buds and blossoms of this marble garden forms a picture that is very charming to the eye. We descended and entered. Within the church, long rows of fluted columns, like huge monuments, divided the building into broad aisles, and on the figured pavement fell many a soft blush from the painted windows above. I knew the church was very large, but I could not fully appreciate its great size until I noticed that the men standing far down by the altar looked like boys and seemed to glide rather than walk. We loitered about gazing aloft at the monster windows all aglow with brilliantly colored scenes in the lives of the Savior and his followers. Some of these pictures are mosaics, and so artistically are their 1,000 particles of tinted glass or stone put together that the work has all the smoothness and finish of a painting. We counted 60 panes of glass in one window, and each pane was adorned with one of these master achievements of genius and patience. The guide showed us a coffee-colored piece of sculpture, which he said was considered to have come from the hand of Phidias, since it was not possible that any other artist of any epoch could have copied nature with such faultless accuracy. The figure was that of a man without a skin, with every vein, artery, muscle, every fiber and tendon and tissue of the human frame represented in minute detail. It looked natural because somehow it looked as if it were in pain. A skinned man would be likely to look that way unless his attention were occupied with some other matter. It was a hideous thing, and yet there was a fascination about it somewhere. I am very sorry I saw it, because I shall always see it now. I shall dream of it sometimes. I shall dream that it is resting its corded arms on the bed's head and looking down on me with its dead eyes. I shall dream that it is stretched between the sheets with me and touching me with its exposed muscles and its stringy, cold legs. It is hard to forget repulsive things. I remember yet how I ran off from school once, when I was a boy, and then, pretty late at night, concluded to climb into the window of my father's office and sleep on a lounge, because I had a delicacy about going home and getting thrashed. As I lay on the lounge and my eyes grew accustomed to the darkness, I could see a long, dusky, shapeless thing stretched upon the floor. A cold shiver went through me. I turned my face to the wall. That did not answer. I was afraid that that thing would creep over and seize me in the dark. I turned back and stared at it for minutes, and minutes they seemed hours. It appeared to me that the lagging moonlight never would get to it. I turned to the wall and counted 20, to pass the feverish time away. I looked, the pale square was nearer. I turned again and counted 50, it was almost touching it. With desperate will I turned again and counted 100, and faced about, all in a tremble. A white human hand lay in the moonlight. Such an awful sinking at the heart, such a sudden gasp for breath. I felt I cannot tell what I felt. When I recovered strength enough, I faced the wall again. But no boy could have remained so, with that mysterious hand behind him. Counted again, and looked, the most of a naked arm was exposed. I put my hands over my eyes and counted till I could stand it no longer, and then the pallid face of a man was there, with the corners of the mouth drawn down, and the eyes fixed and glassy in death. I raised to a sitting posture, and glowered on that corpse, till the light crept down the bare breastline by inch past the nipple end, then it disclosed a ghastly stab. I went away from there. I do not say that I went away in any sort of a hurry, but I simply went, that is sufficient. I went out at the window, and I carried the sash along with me. I did not need the sash, but it was handier to take it than it was to leave it, and so I took it. I was not scared, but I was considerably agitated. When I reached home, they whipped me, but I enjoyed it. It seemed perfectly delightful. That man had been stabbed near the office that afternoon, and they carried him in there to doctor him, but he only lived an hour. I have slept in the same room with him often since then in my dreams. Now we will descend into the crypt, under the grand altar of Milan Cathedral, and receive an impressive sermon from lips that have been silent and hands that have been gestureless for 300 years. The priest stopped in a small dungeon and held up his candle. This was the last resting place of a good man, a warm-hearted, unselfish man, a man whose whole life was given to succoring the poor, encouraging the faint-hearted, visiting the sick, in relieving distress whenever and wherever he found it. His heart, his hand, and his purse were always open. With his story in one's mind, he can almost see his benignant countenance moving calmly among the haggard faces of Milan in the days when the plague swept the city, brave where all others were cowards, full of compassion where pity had been crushed out of all other breasts by the instinct of self-preservation gone mad with terror, cheering all, praying with all, helping all with hand and brain and purse. At a time when parents forsook their children, the friend deserted the friend. And the brother turned away from the sister, while her pleadings were still wailing in his ears. This was good St. Charles Borromeo, Bishop of Milan. The people idolized him, princes lavished uncounted treasures upon him. We stood in his tomb. Nearby was the sarcophagus, lighted by the dripping candles. The walls were faced with bas-reliefs representing scenes in his life, done in massive silver. The priest put on a short white lace garment over his black robe, crossed himself, bowed reverently, and began to turn a windlass slowly. The sarcophagus separated in two parts, lengthwise, and the lower part sank down and disclosed a coffin of rock crystal as clear as the atmosphere. Within lay the body, robed in costly habiliments covered with gold embroidery and starred with scintillating gems. The decaying head was black with age, the dry skin was drawn tight to the bones, the eyes were gone, there was a hole in the temple and another in the cheek, and the skinny lips were parted as in a ghastly smile. Over this dreadful face, its dust and decay and its mocking grin, hung a crown sewn thick with flashing brilliance. And upon the breast lay crosses and croziers of solid gold that were splendid with emeralds and diamonds. How poor and cheap and trivial these gewgaws seemed in presence of the solemnity, the grandeur, the awful majesty of death. Think of Milton, Shakespeare, Washington, standing before a reverent world tricked out in the glass beads, the brass earrings and tin trumpery of the savages of the plains. Dead Bartolomeo preached his pregnant sermon, and its burden was, "You that worship the vanities of earth, you that long for worldly honor, worldly wealth, worldly fame, behold their worth." To us it seemed that so good a man, so kind a heart, so simple a nature, deserved rest and peace in a grave sacred from the intrusion of prying eyes, and believed that he himself would have preferred to have it so, but peradventure our wisdom was at fault in this regard. As we came out upon the floor of the church again, another priest volunteered to show us the treasures of the church. What more? The furniture of the narrow chamber of death we had just visited weighed 6 millions of francs in ounces and carats alone, without a penny thrown into the account for the costly workmanship bestowed upon them. But we followed into a large room filled with tall wooden presses like wardrobes. He threw them open, and behold, the cargoes of crude bullion of the assay offices of Nevada faded out of my memory. There were virgins and bishops there, above their natural size, made of solid silver, each worth, by weight, from 800,000 to 2 millions of francs, and bearing gemmed books in their hands worth 80,000. There were bas-reliefs that weighed 600 pounds, carved in solid silver. Croziers and crosses and candlesticks 6 and 8 feet high, all of virgin gold and brilliant with precious stones, and beside these were all manner of cups and vases, and such things, rich in proportion. It was in Aladdin's palace. The treasures here, by simple weight, without counting workmanship, were valued at 50 millions of francs. If I could get the custody of them for a while, I fear me the market price of silver bishops would advance shortly, on account of their exceeding scarcity, in the Cathedral of Milan. The priest showed us 2 of St. Paul's fingers, and one of St. Peter's, a bone of Judas Iscariot. It was black, and also bones of all the other disciples, a handkerchief in which the Savior had left the impression of his face. Among the most precious of the relics were a stone from the Holy Sepulchre, part of the crown of thorns. They have a whole one at Notre Dame, a fragment of the purple robe worn by the Savior, a nail from the cross, and a picture of the Virgin and Child painted by the veritable hand of St. Luke. This is the second of St. Luke's virgins we have seen. Once a year, all these holy relics are carried in procession through the streets of Milan. I like to revel in the driest details of the great cathedral. The building is 500 feet long by 180 wide, and the principal steeple is in the neighborhood of 400 feet high. It has 7,148 marble statues, and will have upwards of 3,000 more when it is finished. In addition, it has 1,500 bas-reliefs. It has 100 and 36 spires, 21 more, are to be added. Each spire is surmounted by a statue 6.5 feet high. Everything about the church is marble, and all from the same quarry. It was bequeathed to the archbishopric for this purpose centuries ago. So nothing but the mere workmanship costs. Still, that is expensive. The bill foots up 684 millions of francs thus far, considerably over 100 millions of dollars. And it is estimated that it will take 120 years yet to finish the cathedral. It looks complete, but is far from being so. We saw a new statue put in its niche yesterday, alongside of one which had been standing these 400 years, they said. There are 4 staircases leading up to the main steeple, each of which cost $100,000, with the 408 statues which adorn them. Marco Campioni was the architect who designed the wonderful structure more than 500 years ago, and it took him 46 years to work out the plan and get it ready to hand over to the builders. He is dead now. The building was begun a little less than 500 years ago, and the 3rd generation hence will not see it completed. The building looks best by moonlight, because the older portions of it, being stained with age, contrast unpleasantly with the newer and whiter portions. It seems somewhat too broad for its height, but maybe familiarity with it might dissipate this impression. They say that the Cathedral of Milan is second only to St. Peter's at Rome. I cannot understand how it can be second to anything made by human hands. We bid it goodbye, now possibly for all time. How surely, in some future day, when the memory of it shall have lost its vividness, shall we half believe we have seen it in a wonderful dream, but never with waking eyes. Chapter 19. Do you wise zo hout can be? That was what the guide asked when we were looking up at the bronze horses on the Arch of Peace. It meant, do you wish to go up there? I give it as a specimen of guide English. These are the people that make life a burthen to the tourist. Their tongues are never still. They talk forever and forever, and that is the kind of billingsgate they use. Inspiration itself could hardly comprehend them. If they would only show you a masterpiece of art, or a venerable tomb, or a prison house, or a battlefield, hallowed by touching memories or historical reminiscences, or grand traditions, and then step aside and hold still for 10 minutes and let you think, it would not be so bad. But they interrupt every dream, every pleasant train of thought, with their tiresome cackling. Sometimes when I have been standing before some cherished old idol of mine that I remembered years and years ago in pictures in the geography at school, I have thought I would give a whole world if the human parrot at my side would suddenly perish where he stood and leave me to gaze and ponder and worship. No, we did not wise zo hout can be. We wished to go to La Scala, the largest theater in the world, I think they call it. We did so. It was a large place. 7 separate and distinct masses of humanity, 6 great circles, and a monster parquet. We wished to go to the Ambrosian Library, and we did that also. We saw a manuscript of Virgil, with annotations in the handwriting of Petrarch, the gentleman who loved another man's Laura, and lavished upon her all through life a love which was a clear waste of the raw material. It was sound sentiment, but bad judgment. It brought both parties fame, and created a fountain of commiseration for them in sentimental breasts that is running yet. But who says a word in behalf of poor Mr. Laura? I do not know his other name. Who glorifies him? Who bedews him with tears? Who writes poetry about him? Nobody. How do you suppose he liked the state of things that has given the world so much pleasure? How did he enjoy having another man following his wife everywhere, and making her name a familiar word in every garlic-exterminating mouth, in Italy with his sonnets to her preempted eyebrows? They got fame and sympathy, he got neither. This is a peculiarly felicitous instance of what is called poetical justice. It is all very fine, but it does not chime with my notions of right. It is too one-sided, too ungenerous. Let the world go on fretting about Laura and Petrarch if it will. But as for me, my tears and my lamentations shall be lavished upon the unsung defendant. We saw also an autograph letter of Lucrezia Borgia, a lady for whom I have always entertained the highest respect, on account of her rare histrionic capabilities, her opulence in solid gold, goblets made of gilded wood, her high distinction as an operatic screamer, and the facility with which she could order a sextuple funeral and get the corpses ready for it. We saw one single course, yellow hair from Lucrezia's head, likewise. It awoke emotions, but we still live. In this same library, we saw some drawings by Michelangelo. These Italians call him Michelangelo, and Leonardo da Vinci. They spell it Vinci and pronounce it Vinci. Foreigners always spell better than they pronounce. We reserve our opinion of these sketches. In another building, they showed us a fresco representing some lions and other beasts drawing chariots, and they seemed to project so far from the wall that we took them to be sculptures. The artist had shrewdly heightened the delusion by painting dust on the creatures' backs, as if it had fallen there naturally and properly. Smart fellow if it be smart to deceive strangers. Elsewhere we saw a huge Roman amphitheater, with its stone seats still in good preservation. Modernized, it is now the scene of more peaceful recreations than the exhibition of a party of wild beasts with Christians for dinner. Part of the time, the Milanese use it for a race track, and at other seasons they flood it with water and have spirited yachting regattas there. The guide told us these things, and he would hardly try so hazardous an experiment as the telling of a falsehood, when it is all he can do to speak the truth in English without getting the lockjaw. In another place we were shown a sort of summer arbor, with a fence before it. We said that was nothing. We looked again and saw, through the arbor, an endless stretch of garden and shrubbery and grassy lawn. We were perfectly willing to go in there and rest, but it could not be done. It was only another delusiona painting by some ingenious artist, with little charity in his heart for tired folk. The deception was perfect. No one could have imagined the park was not real. We even thought we smelled the flowers at first. We got a carriage at twilight and drove in the shaded avenues with the other nobility, and after dinner, we took wine and ices in a fine garden with the great public. The music was excellent, the flowers and shrubbery were pleasant to the eye, the scene was vivacious, everybody was genteel and well-behaved, and the ladies were slightly mustached and handsomely dressed, but very homely. We adjourned to a café and played billiards an hour, and I made 6 or 7 points by the doctor pocketing his ball, and he made as many by my pocketing my ball. We came near making a carom sometimes, but not the one we were trying to make. The table was of the usual European-style cushions dead and twice as high as the balls, the cues in bad repair. The natives play only a sort of pool on them. We have never seen anybody playing the French 3-ball game yet, and I doubt if there is any such game known in France, or that there lives any man mad enough to try to play it on one of these European tables. We had to stop playing finally, because Dan got to sleeping 15 minutes between the counts and paying no attention to his marking. Afterward, we walked up and down one of the most popular streets for some time, enjoying other people's comfort and wishing we could export some of it to our restless, driving, vitality-consuming marts at home. Just in this one, matter lies the main charm of life in Europe comfort. In America, we hurry which is well. But when the day's work is done, we go on thinking of losses and gains, we plan for the morrow, we even carry our business cares to bed with us, and toss and worry over them when we ought to be restoring our racked bodies and brains with sleep. We burn up our energies with these excitements, and either die early or drop into lean and mean old age at a time of life, which they call a man's prime in Europe. When an acre of ground has produced long and well, we let it lie fallow and rest for a season. We take no man clear across the continent in the same coach he started in. The coach is stabled somewhere on the plains, and its heated machinery allowed to cool for a few days. When a razor has seen long service and refuses to hold an edge, the barber lays it away for a few weeks, and the edge comes back of its own accord. We bestow thoughtful care upon inanimate objects, but none upon ourselves. What a robust people, what a nation of thinkers we might be, if we would only lay ourselves on the shelf occasionally and renew our edges. I do envy these Europeans the comfort they take. When the work of the day is done, they forget it. Some of them go, with wife and children, to a beer hall and sit quietly and genteelly drinking a mug or two of ale and listening to music. Others walk the streets. Others drive in the avenues. Others assemble in the great ornamental squares in the early evening to enjoy the sight and the fragrance of flowers, and to hear the military band's Plano European city being without its fine military music at eventide. And yet others of the populace sit in the open air in front of the refreshment houses and eat ices and drink mild beverages that could not harm a child. They go to bed moderately early and sleep well. They are always quiet, always orderly, always cheerful, comfortable and appreciative of life and its manifold blessings. One never sees a drunken man among them. The change that has come over our little party is surprising. Day by day, we lose some of our restlessness and absorb some of the spirit of quietude and ease that is in the tranquil atmosphere about us and in the demeanor of the people. We grow wise apace. We begin to comprehend what life is for. We have had a bath in Milan, in a public bathhouse. They were going to put all three of us in one bathtub, but we objected. Each of us had an Italian farm on his back. We could have felt affluent if we had been officially surveyed and fenced in. We chose to have 3 bathtubs, and large ones tubs suited to the dignity of aristocrats who had real estate, and brought it with them. After we were stripped and had taken the first chilly dash, we discovered that haunting atrocity that has embittered our lives in so many cities and villages of Italy and France. There was no soap. I called. A woman answered, and I barely had time to throw myself against the door. She would have been in another second. I said, "Beware, woman. Go away from here, go away, now, or it will be the worse for you. I am an unprotected male, but I will preserve my honor at the peril of my life." These words must have frightened her, for she scurried away very fast. Dan's voice rose on the air. "Oh, bring some soap, why don't you?" The reply was Italian. Dan resumed. "Soap, you know soap. That is what I want, soap. SOP, soap, SOP, soap, SOUP, soap. Hurry up. I don't know how you Irish spell it, but I want it. Spell it to suit yourself, but fetch it. I'm freezing." I heard the doctor say impressively, "Dan, how often have we told you that these foreigners cannot understand English? Why will you not depend upon us? Why will you not tell us what you want, and let us ask for it in the language of the country? It would save us a great deal of the humiliation your reprehensible ignorance causes us. I will address this person in his mother tongue, here Caspetto. Corpo di Bacco. Sacramento. Solferino, soap, you son of a gun. Dan, if you would let us talk for you, you would never expose your ignorant vulgarity." Even this fluent discharge of Italian did not bring the soap at once, but there was a good reason for it. There was not such an article about the establishment. It is my belief that there never had been. They had to send far up town and to several different places before they finally got it, so they said. We had to wait 20 or 30 minutes. The same thing had occurred the evening before at the hotel. I think I have divined the reason for this state of things at last. The English know how to travel comfortably, and they carry soap with them. Other foreigners do not use the article. At every hotel we stop at, we always have to send out for soap, at the last moment, when we are grooming ourselves for dinner, and they put it in the bill along with the candles and other nonsense. In Marseille, they make half the fancy toilet soap we consume in America, but the Marseillais only have a vague theoretical idea of its use, which they have obtained from books of travel, just as they have acquired an uncertain notion of clean shirts and the peculiarities of the gorilla and other curious matters. This reminds me of poor Blucher's note to the landlord in Paris. Paris, le 7 Juillet. Monsieur le landlord, sir. Pourquoi don't you met as some savon in your bed chambers? ESDC que vous pensez, I will steal it. La nuit passée you charged me pour 2 chandelles when I only had one. Higher vous avez charged me avec glace when I had none at all. Tout les jours you are coming some fresh game or other on me, mais vous ne pouvez pas play this savon dodge on me twice. Savon is a necessary de la vie to any body but a Frenchman, et g l'aurai hors de cet hotel, or make trouble. You hear me? Allen's. Blucher. I remonstrated against the sending of this note, because it was so mixed up that the landlord would never be able to make head or tail of it. But Blucher said he guessed the old man could read the French of it and average the rest. Blucher's French is bad enough, but it is not much worse than the English one finds in advertisements all over Italy every day. For instance, observe the printed card of the hotel we shall probably stop at on the shores of Lake Como. Notish. This hotel, which the best it is in Italy and most superb, is handsome locate on the best situation of the lake, with the most splendid view near the villas Melzi, to the King of Belgium and Sir Bologna. This hotel have recently enlarged, do offer all commodities on moderate price, at the strangers gentlemen who wish spend the seasons on the lake come. How is that for a specimen? In the hotel is a handsome little chapel, where an English clergyman is employed to preach to such of the guests of the house as hail from England and America. And this fact is also set forth in barbarous English in the same advertisement. Wouldn't you have supposed that the adventurous linguist who framed the card would have known enough to submit it to that clergyman before he sent it to the printer? Here in Milan, in an ancient tumble-down ruin of a church, is the mournful wreck of the most celebrated painting in the world, The Last Supper, by Leonardo da Vinci. We are not infallible judges of pictures, but of course we went there to see this wonderful painting, once so beautiful, always so worshipped by masters in art, and forever to be famous in song and story. And the first thing that occurred was the infliction on us of a placard fairly reeking with wretched English. Take a morsel of it. Bartholomew, that is the first figure on the left-hand side at the spectator, uncertain and doubtful about what he thinks to have heard, and upon which he wants to be assured by himself at Christ and by no others. Good, isn't it? And then Peter is described as argumenting in a threatening and angrily condition at Judas Iscariot. This paragraph recalls the picture. The Last Supper is painted on the dilapidated wall of what was a little chapel attached to the main church in ancient times, I suppose. It is battered and scarred in every direction, and stained and discolored by time, and Napoleon's horses kicked the legs off most the disciples when they, the horses, not the disciples, were stabled there more than half a century ago. I recognized the old picture in a moment, the Savior, with bowed head, seated at the center of a long, rough table with scattering fruits and dishes upon it, and 6 disciples on either side in their long robes, talking to each other, the picture from which all engravings and all copies have been made for 3 centuries. Perhaps no living man has ever known an attempt to paint the Lord's Supper differently. The world seems to have become settled in the belief, long ago, that it is not possible for human genius to outdo this creation of Da Vinci's. I suppose painters will go on copying it as long as any of the original is left visible to the eye. There were a dozen easels in the room, and as many artists transferring the great picture to their canvases. 50 proofs of steel engravings and lithographs were scattered around, too. And as usual, I could not help noticing how superior the copies were to the original, that is, to my inexperienced eye. Wherever you find a Raphael, a Rubens, a Michelangelo, a Carracci, or a Da Vinci, and we see them every day, you find artists copying them, and the copies are always the handsomest. Maybe the originals were handsome when they were new, but they are not now. This picture is about 30 feet long, and 10 or 12 high, I should think, and the figures are at least life-size. It is one of the largest paintings in Europe. The colors are dimmed with age, the countenances are scaled and marred, and nearly all expression is gone from them. The hair is a dead blur upon the wall, and there is no life in the eyes. Only the attitudes are certain. People come here from all parts of the world and glorify this masterpiece. They stand entranced before it with bated breath and parted lips, and when they speak, it is only in the catchy ejaculations of rapture. Oh, wonderful! Such expression, such grace of attitude, such dignity, such faultless drawing, such matchless coloring, such feeling. What delicacy of touch! What sublimity of conception! A vision! A vision! I only envy these people. I envy them their honest admiration, if it be honest their delight, if they feel delight. I harbor no animosity toward any of them. But at the same time, the thought will intrude itself upon me, how can they see what is not visible? What would you think of a man who looked at some decayed, blind, toothless, pock-marked Cleopatra and said, "What matchless beauty! What soul! What expression? What would you think of a man who gazed upon a dingy, foggy sunset and said, "What sublimity"? What feeling? What richness of coloring? What would you think of a man who stared in ecstasy upon a desert of stumps and said, "Oh, my soul, my beating heart, what a noble forest is here"? You would think that those men had an astonishing talent for seeing things that had already passed away. It was what I thought when I stood before the Last Supper and heard men apostrophizing wonders and beauties and perfections which had faded out of the picture and gone 100 years before they were born. We can imagine the beauty that was once in an aged face. We can imagine the forest if we see the stumps, but we cannot absolutely see these things when they are not there. I am willing to believe that the eye of the practiced artist can rest upon the Last Supper and renew a luster where only a hint of it is left, supply a tint that has faded away, restore an expression that is gone, patch and color and add to the dull canvas until at last its figures shall stand before him aglow with the life, the feeling, the freshness, yea, with all the noble beauty that was theirs when first they came from the hand of the Master. But I cannot work this miracle. Can those other uninspired visitors do it, or do they only happily imagine they do? After reading so much about it, I am satisfied that the Last Supper was a very miracle of art once. But it was 300 years ago. It vexes me to hear people talk so glibly of feeling, expression, tone, and those other easily acquired and inexpensive technicalities of art that make such a fine show in conversations concerning pictures. There is not one man in 7,500 that can tell what a pictured face is intended to express. There is not one man in 500 that can go into a courtroom and be sure that he will not mistake some harmless innocent of a juryman for the black-hearted assassin on trial. Yet such people talk of character and presume to interpret expression in pictures. There is an old story that Matthews, the actor, was once lauding the ability of the human face to express the passions and emotions hidden in the breast. He said the countenance could disclose what was passing in the heart plainer than the tongue could. Now, he said, observe my face, what does it express? Despair. Bah, it expresses peaceful resignation. What does this express? Rage. Stuff. It means terror. This. Imbecility. Fool. It is smothered ferocity. Now this. Joy. Oh, perdition. Any ass can see it means insanity. Expression. People coolly pretend to read it, who would think themselves presumptuous if they pretended to interpret the hieroglyphics on the obelisks of Luxor, yet they are fully as competent to do the one thing as the other. I have heard two very intelligent critics speak of Murillo's Immaculate Conception, now in the museum at Seville, within the past few days. One said, "Oh, the Virgin's face is full of the ecstasy of a joy that is complete, that leaves nothing more to be desired on earth." The other said, "Ah, that wonderful face is so humble, so pleading, it says as plainly as words could say it, 'I fear, I tremble, I am unworthy. But thy will be done, sustain thou thy servant.'" The reader can see the picture in any drawing room. It can be easily recognized. The Virgin, the only young and really beautiful Virgin that was ever painted by one of the old masters, some of us think, stands in the crescent of the new moon, with a multitude of cherubs hovering about her, and more coming. Her hands are crossed upon her breast, and upon her uplifted countenance falls a glory out of the heavens. The reader may amuse himself, if he chooses, in trying to determine which of these gentlemen read the Virgin's expression aright, or if either of them did it. Anyone who is acquainted with the old masters will comprehend how much the Last Supper is damaged when I say that the spectator cannot really tell, now, whether the disciples are Hebrews or Italians. These ancient painters never succeeded in denationalizing themselves. The Italian artists painted Italian virgins, the Dutch painted Dutch virgins, the virgins of the French painters were Frenchwomen. None of them ever put into the face of the Madonna that indescribable something which proclaims the Jewess, whether you find her in New York, in Constantinople, in Paris, Jerusalem, or in the Empire of Morocco. I saw in the Sandwich Islands, once, a picture copied by a talented German artist from an engraving in one of the American illustrated papers. It was an allegory, representing Mr. Davis in the act of signing a secession act or some such document. Over him hovered the ghost of Washington in warning attitude, and in the background, a troop of shadowy soldiers in continental uniform were limping with shoeless, bandaged feet through a driving snowstorm. Valley Forge was suggested, of course. The copy seemed accurate, and yet there was a discrepancy somewhere. After a long examination, I discovered what it was: the shadowy soldiers were all Germans. Jeff Davis was a German. Even the hovering ghost was a German ghost. The artist had unconsciously worked his nationality into the picture. To tell the truth, I am getting a little perplexed about John the Baptist and his portraits. In France, I finally grew reconciled to him as a Frenchman. Here he is unquestionably an Italian. What next? Can it be possible that the painters make John the Baptist a Spaniard in Madrid and an Irishman in Dublin? We took an open barouche and drove 2 miles out of Milan to see the Echo, as the guide expressed it. The road was smooth. It was bordered by trees, fields, and grassy meadows, and the soft air was filled with the odor of flowers. Troops of picturesque peasant girls, coming from work, hooted at us, shouted at us, made all manner of game of us, and entirely delighted me. My long-cherished judgment was confirmed. Always did think those frowsy, romantic, unwashed peasant girls I had read so much about in poetry were a glaring fraud. We enjoyed our jaunt. It was an exhilarating relief from tiresome sightseeing. We distressed ourselves very little about the astonishing echo the guide talked so much about. We were growing accustomed to encomiums on wonders that too often proved no wonders at all. And so we were most happily disappointed to find in the sequel that the guide had even failed to rise to the magnitude of his subject. We arrived at a tumble-down old rookery called the Palazzo Simontia, massive hewn-stone affair, occupied by a family of ragged Italians. A good-looking young girl conducted us to a window on the second floor which looked out on a court walled on 3 sides by tall buildings. She put her head out at the window and shouted. The echo answered more times than we could count. She took a speaking trumpet, and through it she shouted, sharp and quick, a single ha. The echo answered. Ha 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 ha. Ha. H-A-A-A. And finally went off into a rollicking convulsion of the jolliest laughter that could be imagined. It was so joyful, so long continued, so perfectly cordial and hearty, that every body was forced to join in. There was no resisting it. Then the girl took a gun and fired it. We stood ready to count the astonishing clatter of reverberations. We could not say 1, 2, 3 fast enough, but we could dot our notebooks with our pencil points almost rapidly enough to take down a sort of shorthand report of the result. My page revealed the following account. I could not keep up, but I did as well as I could. I set down 52 distinct repetitions, and then the echo got the advantage of me. The doctor set down 64, and thenceforth the echo moved too fast for him also. After the separate concussions could no longer be noted, the reverberations dwindled to a wild, long-sustained clatter of sounds, such as a watchman's rattle produces. It is likely that this is the most remarkable echo in the world. The doctor, in jest, offered to kiss the young girl, and was taken a little aback when she said he might for a franc. The commonest gallantry compelled him to stand by his offer, and so he paid the franc and took the kiss. She was a philosopher. She said a franc was a good thing to have, and she did not care anything for one paltry kiss, because she had a million left. Then our comrade, always a shrewd businessman, offered to take the whole cargo at 30 days, but that little financial scheme was a failure. Chapter 20. We left Milan by rail. The cathedral 6 or 7 miles behind us. Vast, dreamy, bluish, snow-clad mountains 20 miles in front of us, these were the accented points in the scenery. The more immediate scenery consisted of fields and farmhouses outside the car, and a monster-headed dwarf and a mustached woman inside it. These latter were not show people. Alas, deformity and female beards are too common in Italy to attract attention. We passed through a range of wild, picturesque hills, steep, wooded, cone-shaped, with rugged crags projecting here and there, and with dwellings and ruinous castles perched away up toward the drifting clouds. We lunched at the curious old town of Como, at the foot of the lake, and then took the small steamer and had an afternoon's pleasure excursion to this place, Bellagio. When we walked ashore, a party of policemen, people whose cocked hats and showy uniforms would shame the finest uniform in the military service of the United States, put us into a little stone cell and locked us in. We had the whole passenger list for company, but their room would have been preferable, for there was no light, there were no windows, no ventilation. It was close and hot. We were much crowded. It was the Black Hole of Calcutta on a small scale. Presently a smoke rose about our feta smoke that smelled of all the dead things of earth, of all the putrefaction and corruption imaginable. We were there 5 minutes, and when we got out, it was hard to tell which of us carried the vilest fragrance. These miserable outcasts called that fumigating us, and the term was a tame one indeed. They fumigated us to guard themselves against the cholera, though we hailed from no infected port. We had left the cholera far behind us all the time. However, they must keep epidemics away somehow or other, and fumigation is cheaper than soap. They must either wash themselves or fumigate other people. Some of the lower classes had rather die than wash, but the fumigation of strangers causes them no pangs. They need no fumigation themselves. Their habits make it unnecessary. They carry their preventive with them, they sweat and fumigate all the day long. I trust I am a humble and a consistent Christian. I try to do what is right. I know it is my duty to pray for them that despitefully use me. And therefore, hard as it is, I shall still try to pray for these fumigating, macaroni-stuffing organ grinders. Our hotel sits at the water's edge, at least its front garden dozen. We walk among the shrubbery and smoke at twilight. We look afar off at Switzerland and the Alps, and feel an indolent willingness to look no closer. We go down the steps and swim in the lake. We take a shapely little boat and sail abroad among the reflections of the stars, lie on the thwarts and listen to the distant laughter, the singing, the soft melody of flutes and guitars that comes floating across the water from pleasuring gondolas. We close the evening with exasperating billiards on one of those same old execrable tables. A midnight luncheon in our ample bedchamber, a final smoke in its contracted veranda facing the water, the gardens, and the mountains, a summing up of the day's events. Then to bed, with drowsy brains harassed with a mad panorama that mixes up pictures of France, of Italy, of the ship, of the ocean, of home, in grotesque and bewildering disorder. Then a melting away of familiar faces, of cities, and of tossing waves, into a great calm of forgetfulness and peace. After which the nightmare. Breakfast in the morning, and then the lake. I did not like it yesterday. I thought Lake Tahoe was much finer. I have to confess now, however, that my judgment erred somewhat, though not extravagantly. I always had an idea that Como was a vast basin of water, like Tahoe, shut in by great mountains. Well, the border of huge mountains is here, but the lake itself is not a basin. It is as crooked as any brook, and only from 1/4 to 2/3 as wide as the Mississippi. There is not a yard of low ground on either side of it, nothing but endless chains of mountains that spring abruptly from the water's edge and tower to altitudes varying from 1,000 to 2,000 feet. Their craggy sides are clothed with vegetation, and white specks of houses peep out from the luxuriant foliage everywhere. They are even perched upon jutting and picturesque pinnacles 1,000 feet above your head. Again, for miles along the shores, handsome country seats, surrounded by gardens and groves, sit fairly in the water, sometimes in nooks carved by nature out of the vine-hung precipices, and with no ingress or egress save by boats. Some have great broad stone staircases leading down to the water, with heavy stone balustrades ornamented with statuary and fancifully adorned with creeping vines and bright-colored flowers for all the world like a drop curtain in a theater, and lacking nothing but long-waisted, high-heeled women and plumed gallants in silken tights coming down to go serenading in the splendid gondola in waiting. A great feature of Como's attractiveness is the multitude of pretty houses and gardens that cluster upon its shores and on its mountain sides. They look so snug and so homelike, and at eventide when everything seems to slumber, and the music of the vesper bells comes stealing over the water, One almost believes that nowhere else than on the Lake of Como can there be found such a paradise of tranquil repose. From my window here in Bellagio, I have a view of the other side of the lake now, which is as beautiful as a picture. A scarred and wrinkled precipice rises to a height of 1,800 feet. On a tiny bench halfway up its vast wall sits a little snowflake of a church, no bigger than a martin box, apparently. Skirting the base of the cliff are 100 orange groves and gardens, flecked with glimpses of the white dwellings that are buried in them. In front, 3 or 4 gondolas lie idle upon the water end in the burnished mirror of the lake. Mountain, chapel, houses, groves, and boats are counterfeited so brightly, and so clearly that one scarce knows where the reality leaves off and the reflection begins. The surroundings of this picture are fine. A mile away, a grove-plumed promontory juts far into the lake and glasses its palace in the blue depths. In midstream, a boat is cutting the shining surface and leaving a long track behind, like a ray of light. The mountains beyond are veiled in a dreamy purple haze. Far in the opposite direction, a tumbled mass of domes and verdant slopes and valleys bars the lake, and here indeed does distance lend enchantment to the viewfor on this broad canvas. Sun and clouds, and the richest of atmospheres, have blended 1,000 tints together, and over its surface the filmy lights and shadows drift, hour after hour, and glorify it with a beauty that seems reflected out of heaven itself. Beyond all question, this is the most voluptuous scene we have yet looked upon. Last night the scenery was striking and picturesque. On the other side, crags and trees and snowy houses were reflected in the lake with a wonderful distinctness, and streams of light from many a distant window shot far abroad over the still waters. On this side, near at hand, great mansions, white with moonlight, glared out from the midst of masses of foliage that lay black and shapeless in the shadows that fell from the cliff above and down. In the margin of the lake every feature of the weird vision was faithfully repeated. Today we have idled through a wonder of a garden attached to a ducal estate, but enough of description is enough, I judge. I suspect that this was the same place the gardener's son deceived the Lady of Leon with, but I do not know. You may have heard of the passage somewhere. A deep vale, shut out by alpine hills from the rude world, near a clear lake margined by fruits of gold and whispering myrtles, glassing softest skies, cloudless, save with rare and roseate shadows. A palace, lifting to eternal heaven its marbled walls from out a glossy bower of coolest foliage musical with birds. That is all very well, except the clear part of the lake. It certainly is clearer than a great many lakes, but how dull its waters are compared with the wonderful transparence of Lake Tahoe. I speak of the north shore of Tahoe, where one can count the scales on a trout at a depth of 180 feet. I have tried to get this statement off at par here, but with no success, so I have been obliged to negotiate it at 50% discount. At this rate, I find some takers. Perhaps the reader will receive it on the same terms 90 feet instead of 180. But let it be remembered that those are forced term share of sale prices. As far as I am privately concerned, I abate not a jot of the original assertion that in those strangely magnifying waters one may count the scales on a trout of the large kind. At a depth of 180 feet may see every pebble on the bottom might even count a paper of dray pins. People talk of the transparent waters of the Mexican Bay of Acapulco, but in my own experience, I know they cannot compare with those I am speaking of. I have fished for trout in Tahoe, and at a measured depth of 84 feet, I have seen them put their noses to the bait, and I could see their gills open and shut. I could hardly have seen the trout themselves, at that distance, in the open air. As I go back in spirit and recall that noble sea, reposing among the snow peaks 6,000 feet above the ocean, the conviction comes strong upon me again that Como would only seem a bedizened little courtier in that august presence. Sorrow and misfortune overtake the legislature that still from year to year permits Tahoe to retain its unmusical cognomen. Tahoe. It suggests no crystal waters, no picturesque shores, no sublimity. Tahoe for a sea in the clouds. A sea that has character and asserts it in solemn calms at times in savage storms. A sea whose royal seclusion is guarded by a cordon of sentinel peaks that lift their frosty fronts 9,000 feet above the level world. A sea whose every aspect is impressive, whose belongings are all beautiful, whose lonely majesty types the deity. Tahoe means grasshoppers. It means grasshopper soup. It is Indian and suggestive of Indians. They say it is Paiute, possibly it is digger. I am satisfied it was named by the diggers, those degraded savages who roast their dead relatives, then mix the human grease and ashes of bones with tar, and gown it thick all over their heads and foreheads and ears, and go caterwauling about the hills and call it mourning. These are the gentry that named the lake. People say that Tahoe means silver lake, limpid water, falling leaf. Bosh. It means grasshopper soup, the favorite dish of the digger tribe, and of the Paiutes as well. It isn't worthwhile, in these practical times, for people to talk about Indian poetry there. Never was any in them except in the Fenimore Cooper Indians. But they are an extinct tribe that never existed. I know the noble red man. I have camped with the Indians. I have been on the warpath with them, taken part in the chase with them for grasshoppers, helped them steal cattle. I have roamed with them, scalped them, had them for breakfast. I would gladly eat the whole race if I had a chance. But I am growing unreliable. I will return to my comparison of the lakes. Comoe is a little deeper than Tahoe, if people here tell the truth. They say it is 1,800 feet deep at this point, but it does not look a dead enough blue for that. Tahoe is 1,525 feet deep in the center, by the state geologist's measurement. They say the great peak opposite this town is 5,000 feet high, but I feel sure that 3,000 feet of that statement is a good honest lie. The lake is a mile wide here, and maintains about that width from this point to its northern extremity, which is distant 16 miles. From here to its southern extremity, say 15 miles, it is not over half a mile wide in any place, I should think. Its snow-clad mountains one hears so much about are only seen occasionally, and then in the distance, the Alps. Tahoe is from 10 to 18 miles wide, and its mountains shut it in like a wall. Their summits are never free from snow the year round. One thing about it is very strange. It never has even a skim of ice upon its surface, although lakes in the same range of mountains, lying in a lower and warmer temperature, freeze over in winter. It is cheerful to meet a shipmate in these out-of-the-way places and compare notes with him. We have found one of ours here, an old soldier of the war, who is seeking bloodless adventures and rest from his campaigns in these sunny lands. Colonel J. Heron Foster, editor of a Pittsburgh journal, and a most estimable gentleman. As these sheets are being prepared for the press, I am pained to learn of his decease, shortly after his return home, 1000 T. Chapter 21. We voyaged by steamer down the Lago di Lecco, through wild mountain scenery, and by hamlets and villas, and disembarked at the town of Lecco. They said it was 2 hours, by carriage to the ancient city of Bergamo, and that we would arrive there in good season for the railway train. We got an open barouche and a wild, boisterous driver, and set out. It was delightful. We had a fast team and a perfectly smooth road. There were towering cliffs on our left, and the pretty Lago di Lecco on our right, and every now and then it rained on us. Just before starting, the driver picked up, in the street, a stump of a cigar an inch long and put it in his mouth. When he had carried it thus about an hour, I thought it would be only Christian charity to give him a light. I handed him my cigar, which I had just lit, and he put it in his mouth and returned his stump to his pocket. I never saw a more sociable man. At least I never saw a man who was more sociable on a short acquaintance. We saw interior Italy now. The houses were of solid stone and not often in good repair. The peasants and their children were idle, as a general thing, and the donkeys and chickens made themselves at home in drawing room and bedchamber, and were not molested. The drivers of each and every one of the slow-moving market carts we met were stretched in the sun upon their merchandise, sound asleep. Every 300 or 400 yards, it seemed to me, we came upon the shrine of some saint or other, a rude picture of him built into a huge cross or a stone pillar. By the roadside, some of the pictures of the Savior were curiosities in their way. They represented him stretched upon the cross, his countenance distorted with agony. From the wounds of the crown of thorns, from the pierced side, from the mutilated hands and feet, From the scourged body, from every handbreadth of his person, streams of blood were flowing. Such a gory, ghastly spectacle would frighten the children out of their senses, I should think. There were some unique auxiliaries to the painting which added to its spirited effect. These were genuine wooden and iron implements, and were prominently disposed round about the figure: a bundle of nails, the hammer to drive them, the sponge, the reed that supported it, the cup of vinegar, the ladder for the ascent of the cross, the spear that pierced the Saviour's side. The crown of thorns was made of real thorns, and was nailed to the sacred head. In some Italian church paintings, even by the old masters, the Savior and the Virgin wear silver or gilded crowns that are fastened to the pictured head with nails. The effect is as grotesque as it is incongruous. Here and there, on the fronts of roadside inns, we found huge, coarse frescoes of suffering martyrs like those in the shrines. It could not have diminished their sufferings, any to be so uncouthly represented. We were in the heart and home of priestcraft, of a happy, cheerful, contented ignorance, superstition, degradation, poverty, indolence, and everlasting, unaspiring worthlessness. And we said fervently, "It suits these people precisely. Let them enjoy it, along with the other animals, and heaven forbid that they be molested." We feel no malice toward these fumigators. We pass through the strangest, funniest, undreamt-of old towns, wedded to the customs and steeped in the dreams of the elder ages, and perfectly unaware that the world turns round. And perfectly indifferent, too, as to whether it turns around or stands still. They have nothing to do but eat and sleep and sleep and eat, and toil a little when they can get a friend to stand by and keep them awake. They are not paid for thinking, they are not paid to fret about the world's concerns. They were not respectable people, they were not worthy people, they were not learned and wise and brilliant people, but in their breasts, all their stupid lives long, resteth a peace that passeth understanding. How can men, calling themselves men, consent to be so degraded and happy? We whisked by many a gray old medieval castle, clad thick with ivy, that swung its green banners down from towers and turrets where once some old crusader's flag had floated. The driver pointed to one of these ancient fortresses and said, I translate, "Do you see that great iron hook that projects from the wall, just under the highest window in the ruined tower?" We said we could not see it at such a distance, but had no doubt it was there. "Well," he said, "there is a legend connected with that iron hook. Nearly 700 years ago, that castle was the property of the noble Count Luigi Gennaro Guido Alfonso di Genova." "What was his other name?" said Dan. "He had no other name. The name I have spoken was all the name he had. He was the son of poor but honest parents. That is all right, never mind, the particulars, go on with the legend." "The legend? Well then, all the world at that time was in a wild excitement about the Holy Sepulchre. All the great feudal lords in Europe were pledging their lands and pawning their plate to fit out men-at-arms, so that they might join the grand armies of Christendom and win renown in the holy wars. The Count Luigi raised money, like the rest, and one mild September morning, armed with battle-axe, portcullis, and thundering culverin, he rode through the greaves and bucklers of his donjon keep with as gallant a troop of Christian bandits as ever stepped in Italy. He had his sword, Excalibur, with him. His beautiful countess and her young daughter waved him a tearful adieu from the battering rams and buttresses of the fortress, and he galloped away with a happy heart. He made a raid on a neighboring baron and completed his outfit with the booty secured. He then razed the castle to the ground, massacred the family, and moved on. They were hardy fellows in the grand old days of chivalry. Alas, those days will never come again. Count Luigi grew high in fame in Holy Land. He plunged into the carnage of 100 battles, but his good Excalibur always brought him out alive, albeit often sorely wounded. His face became browned by exposure to the Syrian sun in long marches. He suffered hunger and thirst. He pined in prisons. He languished in loathsome plague hospitals. And many a time he thought of his loved ones at home and wondered if all was well with them. But his heart said, "Peace, is not thy brother watching over thy household?" 42 years waxed and waned. The good fight was won. Godfrey reigned in Jerusalem. The Christian hosts reared the banner of the cross above the Holy Sepulchre. Twilight was approaching. 50 harlequins, in flowing robes, approached this castle wearily, for they were on foot, and the dust upon their garments betokened that they had traveled far. They overtook a peasant, and asked him if it were likely they could get food and a hospitable bed there, for love of Christian charity, and if perchance a moral parlor entertainment might meet with generous countenance. For, said they, this exhibition hath no feature that could offend the most fastidious taste. Marry, quoth the peasant, an it please your worships, ye had better journey many a good rood hence with your juggling circus than trust your bones in yonder castle. How now, sirrah, exclaimed the chief monk, explain thy ribald speech, or by'r lady it shall go hard with thee. Peace, good mountebank, I did but utter the truth that was in my heart. San Paolo be my witness that did ye, but find the stout Count Leonardo in his cups. Sheer from the castle's topmost battlements would he hurl ye all. Alackaday, the good Lord Luigi reigns not here in these sad times. The good Lord Luigi. I none other, please your worship. In his day, the poor rejoiced in plenty, and the rich he did oppress. Taxes were not known, the fathers of the church waxed fat upon his bounty. Travelers went and came, with none to interfere. And whosoever would might tarry in his halls in cordial welcome, and eat his bread and drink his wine withal. But woe is me! Some 42 years, Agon the good count rode hence to fight for Holy Cross, and many a year hath flown since word or token have we had of him. Men say his bones lie bleaching in the fields of Palestine. And now, God a mercy, the cruel Leonardo lords it in the castle. He wrings taxes from the poor. He robs all travelers that journey by his gates. He spends his days in feuds and murders, and his nights in revel and debauch. He roasts the fathers of the church upon his kitchen spits, and enjoyeth the same, calling it pastime. These 30 years Luigi's countess hath not been seen by any in all this land, and many whisper that she pines in the dungeons of the castle, for that she will not wed with Leonardo, saying her dear lord still liveth, and that she will die ere she prove false to him. They whisper likewise that her daughter is a prisoner as well. Nay, good jugglers, seek ye refreshment otherwhere. 'Twere better that ye perished in a Christian way, than that ye plunged from off yon dizzy tower. Give ye good day. God keep ye, gentle knave, farewell. But heedless of the peasant's warning, the players moved straightway toward the castle. Word was brought to Count Leonardo that a company of mountebanks besought his hospitality. 'Tis well. Dispose of them in the customary manner. Yet stay. I have need of them. Let them come hither. Later, cast them from the battlements, or how many priests have ye on hand? The day's results are meager, good my lord. An abbot and a dozen beggarly friars is all we have. Hell and furies. Is the estate going to cede? Send hither the mountebanks. Afterward, broil them with the priests. The robed and close-scowled harlequins entered. The grim Leonardo sate in state at the head of his council board. Ranged up and down the hall on either hand stood near 100 men-at-arms. Ha, villains, quoth the count, what can ye do to earn the hospitality ye crave? Dread lord and mighty, crowded audiences have greeted our humble efforts with rapturous applause. Among our body count we the versatile and talented Ugolino, the justly celebrated Rodolfo, the gifted and accomplished Rodrigo. The management have spared neither pains nor expense. As death. What can ye do? Curb thy prating tongue. Good my lord, in acrobatic feats, in practice with the dumbbells, in balancing and ground and lofty tumbling, are we versed, and sith your highness asketh me, I venture here to publish that in the truly marvelous and entertaining Zampalera station. Gag him. Throttle him. Body of Bacchus. Am I a dog that I am to be assailed with polysyllabled blasphemy like to this? But hold. Lucretia Isabel, stand forth. Sirrah, behold this dame, this weeping wench. The first I marry, within the hour, the other shall dry her tears or feed the vultures. Thou and thy vagabonds shall crown the wedding with thy merry makings. Fetch hither the priest. The dame sprang toward the chief player. Oh, save me, she cried, save me from a fate far worse than death. Behold these sad eyes, these sunken cheeks, this withered frame. See thou the wreck this fiend hath made, and let thy heart be moved with pity. Look upon this damosel, note her wasted form, her halting step, her bloomless cheeks where youth should blush and happiness exult in smiles. Hear us and have compassion. This monster was my husband's brother. He who should have been our shield against all harm, hath kept us shut within the noisome caverns of his donjon keep for lo these 30 years. And for what crime? None other than that I would not belie my troth, root out my strong love for him who marches with the legions of the cross in holy land. For oh, he is not dead, and wed with him. Save us, oh, save thy persecuted suppliants. She flung herself at his feet and clasped his knees. Ha ha ha, shouted the brutal Leonardo. Priest, to thy work, and he dragged the weeping dame from her refuge. Say, once for all, will you be mine, for by my halidome, that breath that uttereth thy refusal shall be thy last on earth. Never. Then die, and the sword leaped from its scabbard. Quicker than thought, quicker than the lightning's flash, 50 monkish habits disappeared, and 50 knights in splendid armor stood revealed. 50 falchions gleamed in air above the men at arms, and brighter, fiercer than them all, flamed Excalibur aloft, and cleaving downward struck the brutal Leonardo's weapon from his grasp. A Luigi to the rescue. Whoop! A Leonardo. Terran ounds. O God, my husband. O God, my wife. My father. My precious. Count Luigi bound his usurping brother hand and foot. The practiced knights from Palestine made holiday sport of carving the awkward men-at-arms into chops and steaks. The victory was complete. Happiness reigned. The knights all married the daughter. Joy. Wassail. Venice. But what did they do with the wicked brother? Oh, nothing, only hanged him on that iron hook I was speaking of. By the chin. As how? Passed it up through his gills into his mouth. Leave him there. Couple of years. Eyes is he dead. 650 years ago, or such a matter. Splendid legend, splendid lie drive on. We reached the quaint old fortified city of Bergamo, the renowned in history, some 3/4 of an hour before the train was ready to start. The place has 30 or 40,000 inhabitants, and is remarkable for being the birthplace of Harlequin. When we discovered that legend of our driver took to itself a new interest in our eyes. Rested and refreshed, we took the rail happy and contented. I shall not tarry to speak of the handsome Lago di Gardi, its stately castle that holds in its stony bosom the secrets of an age so remote that even tradition goeth not back to it, the imposing mountain scenery that ennobles the landscape thereabouts, nor yet of ancient Padua or haughty Verona, nor of their Montagues and Capulets, their famous balconies and tombs of Juliet and Romeo et al., but hurry straight to the ancient city of the sea, the widowed bride of the Adriatic. It was a long, long ride. But toward evening, as we sat silent and hardly conscious of where we were subdued into that meditative calm that comes so surely after a conversational storm, someone shouted, "Venice." And sure enough, afloat on the placid sea a league away, lay a great city, with its towers and domes and steeples drowsing in a golden mist of sunset.